The storm came out of nowhere. One moment I was cruising down the old country highway, enjoying the quiet hum of my engine against the sprawling dark forest. The next, the rain was a roaring sheet of water that blurred the world into nothingness. My phone's GPS had died miles back, leaving me with nothing but instinct to navigate the narrow road. The headlights barely cut through the storm, and the clock on the dashboard blinked stubbornly at midnight. Just when I began to think I might have to pull over and wait for the storm to ease, I saw it, a flicker of light ahead. At first, I thought it was a gas station, maybe someone's porch light. But as I drew closer, the shadow of a building emerged, a large, sprawling structure with sagging walls and ivy-covered stone. It was an inn, though I hadn't seen it on any map. Something about it seemed off. The way it sat perched on the edge of the woods, half swallowed by darkness, gave the impression that it didn't belong here, or anywhere at all. Yet drawn by a need for shelter and a strange pull I couldn't explain, I turned into the gravel driveway. The rain had soaked me through by the time I reached the door, a heavy wooden thing that groaned as it opened. Inside, the inn was eerily still. The lobby was dim, lit by a single chandelier dripping with cobwebs. A woman sat behind the desk, her thin frame dwarfed by a towering bookshelf crammed with books that looked as old as the building itself. She looked up as I approached. Her eyes were pale, almost glassy, and her face carried a weariness that seemed to weigh her down. "You've come to see them, haven't you?" she said. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "Them?" I asked, confused. She only smiled, a small, knowing thing that made my stomach tighten, and handed me a key. "Room 7. Stay inside if the music starts." Before I could ask what she meant, she turned away, disappearing into the shadows of a hallway. I made my way to the room, the key cold and heavy in my palm. The corridor stretched out before me, dimly lit by flickering sconces. The walls seemed to press closer with every step, and the air carried a faint scent of lavender and something else, metallic and sour, that I couldn't place. Room 7 was at the very end, directly across from a grand portrait. The image stopped me in my tracks. It showed a young couple, locked in a graceful dance. The woman's face was soft and sad, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The man's expression, by contrast, was unsettling. His smile stretched too wide, his gaze boring into mine as if he could see me through the canvas. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. The storm howled outside as I turned the key in the lock and stepped inside, the feeling that I wasn't alone growing stronger with every passing second. The room was sparse but functional. A small bed with a faded quilt, a writing desk, and a mirror mounted above an old wooden dresser. The storm outside battered against the windows, and the shadows in the corners seemed deeper than they should have been. I tried to shake off the unease that clung to me since stepping into the inn. It was just an old building, I told myself. Old buildings creaked. Old portraits stared too long. Still, I couldn't bring myself to turn off the lamp by the bed. I sat there, listening to the rain and trying to distract myself with a book I'd brought. But my thoughts kept drifting back to the innkeeper's words. "You've come to see them, haven't you?" It was past midnight when I first heard it. Faint at first, like a distant whisper. A melody. A waltz. I froze, the book slipping from my hands. The sound was coming from the hallway, weaving its way toward me like an invisible thread. My heartbeat quickened, a steady drum against my ribs. I wanted to tell myself it was just a guest, someone playing music to pass the time. But hadn't the innkeeper said I was the only one staying here tonight? The melody grew louder, clearer, carrying a haunting beauty that made my skin prickle. stepped to the door and pressed my ear against the wood. There it was, unmistakable now. A slow, mournful waltz, as though played on a forgotten gramophone. A part of me knew I should stay inside. The innkeeper had warned me. But another part, a curious and reckless part, urged me to look. I cracked the door open. The hallway was empty, bathed in a pale, flickering glow that didn't seem to come from any visible source. And yet, the music was there, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. It led me forward, pulling me toward the grand staircase at the center of the inn. At the base of the staircase, I stopped. The air was colder here, and the shadows seemed to dance with the rhythm of the music. The ballroom door, heavy and ornate, stood slightly ajar. The melody spilled out from within, impossibly rich and alive. I shouldn't have gone in. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to return to the safety of my room, but I pushed the door open anyway. Inside, the air felt heavier, thick with an oppressive energy that made it hard to breathe. The chandelier overhead swayed gently, though there was no wind. And there, at the center of the ballroom, I saw them, the couple from the portrait. They moved in perfect harmony, gliding across the floor as though no time had passed. Her pale dress flowed like water, and his dark suit seemed to shimmer with an unnatural glow. But their faces, oh, their faces. They weren't quite human. The woman's eyes glistened with tears that never fell, her lips moving soundlessly as though pleading for help. The man's expression twisted between adoration and something cruel, his gaze piercing through her as though she were a prize rather than a partner. The music stopped suddenly, and they froze. Slowly, their heads turned toward me in unison. I felt my breath catch. The woman's mouth opened, her voice barely above a whisper. "Help us," she said. The man's smile widened into something unnatural, his teeth glinting in the dim light. "Stay," he said, his voice sharp as broken glass. And then, the door slammed shut behind me. The door slammed so hard that the sound reverberated through the ballroom, shaking the chandelier above. My breath came in shallow gasps as I turned back to the couple. They were no longer frozen. Slowly, they began to move again, but not toward each other. Toward me. The man's eyes gleamed with something dark and possessive, and his steps were deliberate, as though savoring my fear. The woman reached out a trembling hand, her lips quivering with unspoken words. She seemed desperate, yet somehow hesitant, as though touching me might shatter her. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice faint but laced with sorrow. "I didn't mean to," I stammered, backing away toward the wall. My heart pounded against my ribs. I'll leave, okay? I'll go back to my room." The man's smile turned razor sharp. "Leave?" he echoed mockingly. "You stepped into our dance. Now you stay." With a flick of his hand, the music started again, louder this time, filling every corner of the room. My body moved without my consent, my legs dragging me forward in time with the haunting melody. I stumbled, my arms jerking unnaturally as though invisible strings were pulling me into their waltz. "No!" I gasped, fighting the force that compelled me. But it was useless. I was drawn into the dance, my feet sliding across the warped wooden floor as though I had done this 1,000 times. The woman's cold fingers brushed mine as she took my hand. Her face was pale and anguished, and I noticed for the first time the faint red mark around her neck, like a phantom noose. She leaned close, her breath icy against my ear. "He'll trap you here," she murmured, "like he trapped me." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. But before she could answer, the man was between us, his grip clamped around my wrist, and pain shot through me like fire. "Enough," he growled, his voice low and venomous. The room spun as he pulled me closer, forcing me into a deadly rhythm. My surroundings blurred, the edges of the ballroom dissolving into darkness. I could barely keep my footing, my body swaying to the relentless waltz. It wasn't just a dance. It was a fight for control. "I can help you," I shouted to the woman, my voice barely audible over the deafening music. "Tell me what to do." Her eyes widened in shock, and she shook her head violently. "You can't stop him. He'll destroy you." The man's grip tightened, his smirk growing crueler. "You should have stayed in your room," he sneered. "But since you're here, let's see how well you can play." I realized then that this wasn't just a haunting. It was a trap. They weren't reenacting their death. They were pulling others into it, ensuring the cycle continued. And I was next. Desperation surged through me as I fought against his iron grasp. I had to find a way to break free, to break them free. But the rules of this twisted game were still a mystery, and the clock was running out. The music swelled, pounding in my head like a fevered heartbeat. Every step the man forced me to take dragged me deeper into his world, the air thickening until it felt like I was drowning. His grip was cold iron, pulling me close, his face inches from mine. "You'll make a fine addition," he murmured, his voice a mix of mockery and delight. "The dance is eternal, you know. You'll learn to love it in time." The woman stood frozen nearby, her pale hands covering her mouth as though suppressing a scream. Her eyes burned with helplessness, but something else glimmered there too. Hope. "Tell me how to stop this," I shouted to her, my voice cracking under the strain. Her gaze darted to the far side of the ballroom, where the faint outline of a wooden chest rested beneath a dusty velvet curtain. "The knife," she whispered, so softly I wasn't sure I'd heard her. I didn't have time to ask questions. My instincts took over. The man spun me forcefully, his strength unnatural, and I used the momentum to break free, wrenching my arm from his grasp. He stumbled but recovered quickly, his smile vanishing as his eyes filled with rage. "You dare defy me?" he roared, the music warping into a discordant frenzy. The room seemed to shift, the floor rippling like water as he stalked toward me. Ignoring the cold terror that clutched at my chest, I sprinted for the chest. My feet felt like lead, the air pressing down on me as though the ballroom itself wanted to keep me away. The woman's voice rang out behind me, sharp and desperate. "Hurry!" I reached the chest and threw it open, my hands fumbling through old, decaying fabrics and brittle letters. At the bottom, glinting faintly in the dim light, was the knife, a tarnished, cruel-looking thing with a hilt wrapped in blackened leather. The man appeared before me, his form blurring at the edges like a shadow come to life. His face twisted into something monstrous, his smile stretching impossibly wide. "You think you can stop me with that?" My hands trembled as I gripped the knife, its weight unfamiliar but oddly steadying. The woman was suddenly beside me, her voice urgent. "Carve his name into the floor," she said. "Do it now." The man lunged, his fingers clawing from my throat. I ducked, falling to my knees as his shriek of rage filled the room. With all the strength I could muster, I plunged the knife into the wooden floor, carving deep grooves into the ancient boards. The air exploded with a deafening roar, the chandelier above shattering as the ballroom dissolved into chaos. The man's form began to waver, his screams splitting into 1,000 voices. The woman dropped to her knees beside me, her hands gripping mine as we finished the final letter of his name. Then, Silence. The oppressive weight in the room lifted, and the man was gone. The woman knelt beside me, her face streaked with ghostly tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice like the wind through a distant graveyard. Before I could respond, her form began to fade, her figure dissolving into pale light. As she disappeared, the storm outside began to die down, and the first rays of dawn crept through the broken windows. I was alone, or so I thought. The silence that followed was oppressive, almost louder than the chaos had been. I sat there breathless, my hands still clutching the knife as though it might vanish if I let go. The ballroom felt different now, emptier. The air was lighter, the strange pull I'd felt since entering the inn dissipating like smoke. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't entirely alone. The portrait in the hallway flashed in my mind, and I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the ache in my limbs. I staggered out of the ballroom and into the corridor, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The portrait was gone. In its place was an empty frame, its edges scorched black. For a moment, I thought I might be free of whatever haunted this place. Then I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper. "Thank you." I turned, my heart leaping into my throat. But the corridor was empty, the only movement coming from the flickering sconces along the walls. Still, the voice lingered, soft and sorrowful, as if carried by the fading storm outside. Shaking, I made my way back to my room. The innkeeper was nowhere to be seen, and I couldn't bring myself to call out for her. My belongings were exactly as I'd left them, untouched despite the chaos that had unfolded. I packed hastily, desperate to leave before the weight of the inn's strange history could trap me again. As I stepped into the lobby, the innkeeper appeared from the shadows as though summoned. She looked different now, less frail, her expression lighter, though her pale eyes still seemed to look through me rather than at me. "You freed them," she said simply, her voice carrying an odd note of finality. What were they? Why were they trapped here?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answers. "They were doomed by their own love," she replied. "But you gave them peace. The curse is broken, for them at least." Her words sent a shiver through me, and I noticed for the first time how hollow the inn seemed, like a place that had been abandoned for years rather than lived in. "And me?" I asked. "Am I free?" Her lips curled into a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You've done what you came to do," she said, sidestepping the question. I didn't press her. Something told me I wouldn't like the answer. When I stepped outside, the storm had passed, the sky streaked with the soft colors of dawn. The inn loomed behind me, its dark windows reflecting nothing but the empty road ahead. I drove away. The image of the dancing couple burned into my memory. For days after, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, especially when the rain began to fall. And late at night, when I'm alone, I sometimes hear it, that faint, mournful waltz echoing from nowhere. A reminder that some dances never truly end.